I welcome you in the name of ETH Raum, the platform for what we call a future-proof spatial planning and development. I think we will reflect on that maybe together with our guest today, if we can have something as a future-proof strategy. At least we try. We are part of the network City and Landscape here at ETH Zurich. For this launch talk, I warmly welcome Professor Kristian Kreiner from CBS. Kristian is a very esteemed professor from Copenhagen Business School, and he is known for his contributions to the field of organization theory, particularly, but not only, in the context of architecture and design, but also the building sector. One of his significant achievements is his research and his insights into the organizational and managerial aspects of architectural competitions and projects, and he will focus in today's launch talk on architectural competitions. His work very often focuses on understanding the complexities of managing creativity, managing innovation in architecture and beyond, which has implications not only for the architectural practices, but also for broader fields involving project-based work, creative industries, and as we just heard before in our student lecture, also organizational transformations. Additionally, Kristian has been involved in extensive research on the management of uncertainties, if we can call it like that, and risks in project works, also the risks of learning the wrong things. Maybe you will reflect on that too. Especially, of course, in projects where the outcome is highly uncertain, as it often is in architectural competitions, and where traditional project management models may not be entirely applicable. This research has contributed valuable perspectives to the disciplines of project management, organizational studies, but he also contributed so much to spatial planning, to urban development, to architectural theory. Maybe you can also see that as we once had a special edition of the Scandinavian Journal of Management, which we co-edited, I think, on the field of architectural competition. So you really bridged these different disciplines. So I am very much honored that you are here, and I welcome you to give your talk. I'm looking forward to it. Maybe half an hour, a bit more, and then we have plenty of time for discussion. Can we switch the presentation? And then I'm fine. Oh, you integrated it. That's even better. Okay, a warm welcome. The floor is yours, dear Kristian.
Thank you, Joris, very much. I'm happy to be here. It's a wonderful opportunity to revisit some of my own work and the work of others in architectural competitions. I have actually had dear colleagues here at this institution in the field of architectural competition. So I'm partly just feeding back to you what your own professors have been working on here. But architectural competition is an interesting field. The institution of architectural competition is very, very old. It actually started perhaps before our time, but at least it's known in detail from the 15th century, when actually there was a competition for building the dome of the cathedral in Florence. And I can tell you that the brief for that competition was only 2 sentences long. Something has changed with the institution, but the institution as such has actually survived all this time. And of course, it's a central institution in society because competition as a concept is central to our values. It has this idea that if we compete, with somebody else, we will actually put more effort, we will strain ourselves to produce more interesting things. It's a sign or a method for creating new ideas and creativity. And an architectural competition is just the design instantiation of this value of competition. And of course, the interesting point for me is what is actually, how can we make sense of the ways in which we design the events, the competition within architecture today? And then the second issue that I'm interested in is what impact will it have on the performance of the competition that we design the competition in a particular way. So this is again this idea, standard in organization. How can we relate the design of an organization to the performance within the organization? Is it recognizable in the design of the organization, the way we observe organization work, or is there some additional aspects, some other things that actually drive the design of a competition from the practice of a competition? I'll deal with that in a practical and particular manner. I'll use a particular example of a competition to show the impact of the design of the competition on actually the performance of the competition and especially the outcome of the competition. So the issue is the outcome of a competition understandable in terms of the design of the competition? Can we translate and learn from the outcome of the competition on how to design competitions in the future? What is the relationship between the design of the competition and the outcome and the performance? So that's my interest. And let me go straight to it. I have limited amount of time, so I'll shortcut some of it. But the idea about the design of a competition could be understood as balancing three central concerns. The one, of course, is the creativity concern. We organize competitions in order to stimulate creativity. We want people to imagine how to solve a problem of architecture. We accept that creativity is actually a way of working that is not pre-designed with an endpoint, but it's an interpretation of the problem and of the task. We want many different ideas on what to do in a subsequent building process. So creativity is about creating alternatives. It's about creating new readings of the need. And we only organize a competition which will try to interpret the needs of the client if the client is somewhat uncertain about what it is that they want. There's no reason to create a competition if you already know what you want in terms of a building design. So creativity is important because clients will not be able to present a specific solution to their needs. They want different takes on the same thing. Creativity is a fundamental concern in architectural competition design. The other one, of course, is legitimacy. So we want to design competition that are conducted in a fair manner, meaning that every contestant is actually operating on the same set of rules. That's what we mean by a fair competition. That is when people are competing on the same terms. And we also want fairness in the sense that the outcome of the competition, the appointment of the winner, should be fair in the sense that it should be the right one, the best one. So fairness is the second fundamental concern when we design competition in architecture. And the third one is efficiency. Of course, it's cumbersome to organize a competition. There are many investments of time and funding in participating. There is a huge task for the jury to go through all these proposals and to elect and select the best one, to judge and rank the entries in the competition is normally a huge task for the jury. And for the participants, of course, in a competition, you realize that you have a slim chance of winning because there are so many others competing with you. So there is a slim chance of winning. On the other hand, you have to invest a lot of money and effort in preparing your entry. So the efficiency is that there should be an acceptable expected return on your investment in participating in a competition. The whole idea about designing competition is actually sort of somehow, and the development in the design of competition is understandable in a moving emphasis on these three concerns. I'll illustrate it shortly or briefly. So take the example of the move towards not open architectural competition, but invited competitions. So it's actually not a matter of you deciding you want to participate. It's up to the organizer of the competition to invite you. So participation is a matter of invitation. That increases the efficiency. It not only limits the number of competitors you have in the competition, increasing the likelihood that you may actually win the competition and therefore justifying your effort and investment in participating. It eases, of course, the work of the jury. There are fewer entries to rank and rate, and it enables the organizer of the competition very often to actually pay for the participation. It becomes payable to actually invite and motivate participating. Of course, it reduces creativity because there are fewer ideas and views on the same type of problem. It reduces the number of alternative designs that the client can choose among. So there is an implicit reduction of creativity in this idea of this change towards invited competition. And of course, it also reduces the fairness in a certain sense, because who are actually invited to participate? It's a non-transparent process by which people are selected or invited to participate. It's not something that is publicly announced or contested. It's something which is going on beyond the public awareness. So it's somehow a problem of transparency. But also there is this notion that an invitation is not just an invitation from the point of view of the architects, because the risk is that you get a reputation of turning down invitation and then you are not invited in the future competitions. So there is a strong sense that if you are invited, you have to participate. Occasionally, architects participate in competition with the hope of not winning because they don't have the capacity to carry out the job if they are actually unlucky enough to win. But that's a different story. This notion that it's actually obligatory to participate if you are actually invited, it is somehow a reduction of the fairness. And then, of course, as I already mentioned, there is a huge increase in the volume of the briefs. Why is it that a brief nowadays will be several hundred pages long when we actually built the Dome of Florence based on a competition that was only 2 sentences long. There is something going on here. And why is it that briefs increase in size all the time, and it's a continuous process? Well, it is to emphasize the concern for legitimacy. Competing on a common understanding of the design task implies that you specify the design task in more and more detail. That's what we see in the brief. They increase in size because the specificity of the task is increased. In one of the competition I studied, we counted more than 500 requests or desires to the entries. 500 concerns that are aspects of the design task that was specified and of course needed to be attended to by the contestants. So there is this idea that legitimacy is favored by the fact that the task is more specified, and because the task is more specified, then it will be easier for the jury to base their decision of the winner on the basis of the design definition. So it's an explicitation of the basis for making choices about who is winning the competition. It does, of course, reduce the efficiency. So this is on balance an emphasis on legitimacy, but of course also a lessened emphasis on efficiency. It increases the cost of participation because it's much more difficult to make sure that you have actually complied with a specified task. And it also, and I can tell you from experience that is a real concern, that when the document, the brief becomes so extensive, it very often happens that there are inconsistencies between what you ask for on page 20 and what you ask for on page 80. Nobody can really ensure the consistency across such complex. So this is the things, the bases for designing competitions. So what is the practice of conducting an architectural competition? I'll give you one dramatic example, which I like a lot because it asks for reinterpretation of the role and the relationship between design and outcome of competitions. It's about a new maritime museum of Denmark in a city called Helsingør. It's close to the Hamlet Castle, if you have ever been in Copenhagen or in Denmark, so you know that Hamlet is renowned for observing that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark, and this competition will be a testimony to the truth of that statement. It's a big museum. It was occasioned by things that are complicated and not relevant to the competition. But the task was to build a museum into a dry dock at a harbor in Helsingør, that the harbor was turned into sort of a cultural center of the city, but the old facilities of the dry dock was supposed to hold this new museum. And there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that it should be within this dry dock. The museum should be built below surface and it should be built inside the existing dry dock, as I will return to why that is important. The competition was designed in a very traditional way, single stage seal bid invited competition. So that's the standard of competitions in architecture these days. And the evaluation criteria was specified at length, and in short it said the interest would be rated on the overall architectural, aesthetic, functional and technical quality. And then of course it should be buildable within the budget that was allocated to this museum, which was at that time 130 million Danish crowns. Then they required to know who was going to build the building if the entry was accepted. And then, of course, there was a concern about how much does it cost to operate the facility that was designed. This about the inconsistency problem I can illustrate straight away, because you cannot ask for specification of the qualification of the participants in a single stage seal bid invited competition. Seal bid means that they should be not known who the design or the architectural firm is behind each of the entries. So can you imagine that kind of inconsistency? You ask to be informed about the people working on the project, and then you ask the architectural companies to be anonymous. Interesting. That requirement, that criteria was taken out of the competition in the midst of the process. The winning design was a spectacular piece of architecture, which is quite an accomplishment given the fact that it was built below surface and inside a dry dock, in a sense. It was so spectacular that it made it to the New York Times list of places to go to in 2014. So it was not only, if you happen to be in Copenhagen, go see it. No, it was worth the travel to Denmark to see this piece of architecture. But the problem was that this was a proposal that was strictly against the requirement and the rules of the competition. On one particular aspect, it was said and stated very often in the process that you were not allowed to compromise the integrity of the periphery of the dry dock. For one particular reason, if you build things into the side of the dry dock, the groundwater will simply push the dry dock up in the above the surface. So you cannot compromise the integrity of the perimeter. And the budget of 130 million Danish crown, which was a huge allocation to a very small and not very spectacular museum, was considered realistic only if you preserved the surface. The winning proposal was to build it into the sides of the dry dock, which would be an engineering challenge of high proportion, and it would explode the budget. It so happens that when they saw this proposal, they were not in doubt that was the only feasible winner of the competition. But the problem was there was no money for it. So by by coincidence, they were able to manage a breakfast with the biggest funder of this competition. And over the breakfast, the budget was increased from 130 million Danish crowns to above 300 million Danish crowns. That was a good lunch or breakfast for this. But now you realize, and I can show you the picture of the place. That's the Hamlet Castle in the background. But that over there, of course, is the dry dock. You can see it's empty, except for all the anchors that they had to put in. I think they put 600 anchors to keep this dry dock in place after they built the museum into the ground. It's a beautiful place. But is this... Oh. Is this a celebration or a betrayal of the architectural competition institution? There is absolutely no doubt that this was a spectacular outcome of the competition, better than anybody had imagined possible. On the other hand, it was an illegal competition. They were actually taken to court for appointing a winner of the competition that was not in compliance with the brief, and they were fined. And I will not give you the detail of how they avoided this court ruling, and was nonetheless able to continue with building this illegal design of outcome of competition. So we have here a situation. We have prepared a design of the competition. We have specified the rules of the game, and then we appoint a winner, which is blatantly not in compliance with the brief. What to make of that? Isn't that a nice observation, that you can actually win a competition without complying with the rules of the competition? This is how they justified it. The winner was a very well-known Danish architecture company, and he said it would have been architectural suicide to feel sort of confined by the dry dock. The problem, of course, was that all the other competitors in the competition felt obliged to commit architectural suicide, and therefore presented solutions that nobody could really be enthusiastic about, right? It was only when they actually broke that constraint on the solution space that they were able to fulfill the idea of a spectacular piece of architecture. So we can easily conclude here that in this case, creativity trumps legitimacy as a concern, right? So we have tried to design a balance between three different concerns behind the competition, and then in the end, the balancing of emphasis on the concerns are decided in the process of the competition, not as a prerequisite for conducting a competition, but as an outcome of the competition. Yeah, there was some legal creativity as well in institutional re-engineering. I'll leave that. Now, why is this perhaps in its sort of transparency a strange way of conducting architectural competition? But maybe it's not that unusual. Maybe it's actually the way it's always done except that it was more visible in this case than in other cases. And one of them is this idea that the creativity basis of architectural competition implies that the competing architects are not providing solutions to the same problem, but are providing different interpretations of the problem, the design problem in the first place. And if it's true that they are actually providing different interpretations of the design task, then as an implication, we know that the interest, the solution they come up with are incommensurable. They are simply different ways of understanding the needs of the client and the prescriptions of the competition brief. They are not the same places. So it's not competing towards the same destination. It's racing towards different destinations. And then, of course, we have to decide which of the destinations that each of the competitors reached do we like the best. It's not based on the same set of tasks, but it's the different take. So in any case, any of these proposals are representing an idiosyncratic reading of the brief, and it's of course possible to be idiosyncratic when you have 500 requests to relate to, right? So it's sort of, what do you consider most salient? What do you consider most important? And then we will design a solution based on that. But it's on any occasion is a very strong selection of a few aspects to find this basis for your design proposal. It is not the same task. It's based on an idiosyncratic interpretation of the task, and that's part of it. And then, of course, we know that the jury is in a problem, right? Because if it's not different solutions to the same problem, but different interpretations of the problem with an attached solution, then they are incommensurable, and therefore we know that the jury's first task is to make them comparable, right? They must simply put the entries in the competition on some common scale in order to rank them and to rate them. So, and how do they do that? In this case, it's obvious. They do it by appointing the winner and using the winner's interpretation as the basis for criticizing all the other interpretations, right? That is about the only way the jury can work around. We think that the work of the jury implies that first you rate the entries on the basis of architectural and functional and all the other criteria that was stated in the brief, and start by rating the individual entries and then rank them, that is to appoint the best and the worst entry. But in fact, it's the opposite sequence. You have to rank them first in order to find the winner that will provide the criteria for interpreting and criticizing the losing propositions. That's how it's done. It's perhaps also the way it must be done. You can understand that it's partly controversial, but perhaps there is no way around at least this partial truth that you must select the winner before you can define on which criteria you should evaluate and rate all the other entries. At least there must be another way of circumventing the fact that these entries are actually incommensurable when they are delivered. if the winner's reading is sensible, that is, that they have made this idiosyncratic reasoning about the brief, if it can be justified, if it can be understood, it's actually not difficult to justify the outcome as a fair outcome. That's what they do all the time. It's easy to rationalize the fact that this was a good and legitimate reading of the brief. We also understand that there were other readings of the brief that would have been similarly legitimate, but in this case, it's not a matter of there was only one legitimate reading. The reading that wins must be rationalizable in terms of the brief. There is a strange thing that even the losers in the competition, they normally accept the legitimacy of the outcome. Not in this case with the competition, but for the museum, but in most other cases, they actually accept the legitimacy of the winner, even though, as you can imagine, there is some randomness in the process. And the metaphor for that is an architect I interviewed after having lost a competition, and he simply said, they pushed the right buttons, we pushed the wrong buttons, right? So and that was the interpretation of the brief and some of the requirements in the brief, which they had taken very literally, and the winning proposal took it serious, but not literally. But the fact, of course, is that you make sense by saying that they pushed the right button without really realizing that it was only these buttons only became the right ones because it was the winning proposal, right? It was not because they pressed the right buttons that they became the winners. It was because they became the winners that these buttons became the right ones. And that's a rationalization which is generally accepted everywhere. What to learn? I think it's worth to remember that a brief is not defining the process. We can tell that in this case. It becomes a very important discursive tool because that's what retrospectively provide the becauses, the justifications for appointing the winner. It's not the cause, but it's useful as a provider of justification, of reason. It's also important to realize that the complexity of the brief actually invites more complexity and creativity of the competition. We all know that you must be selective when the number of requirements are above 500. And this randomness of attention is actually one of the ways in which we create variation. It's not the justification for being more specific in the brief, but it's a consequence. We can learn from this case that architects can win competition with very strange and idiosyncratic readings of the brief, actually readings that are not sensible, but they can win. It's not increasing the likelihood, we cannot say, but it's a possibility that you can win even if you're not in compliance with the brief. You can win both with sort of a competition strategy where you try to truly interpret the brief and come with a design proposal, but you can also skip the brief completely and design what you think the client needs or whatever how you would justify it. We call that an anarchic proposal. You can win with both proposals, but you're probably more pleased to win with one of the anarchic proposal. In this case, Big might have won had they complied with the brief, but they would have committed architectural suicide and would probably have been very unpleased to spend more time on that project. Now they added to their international reputation by winning with a proposal that was in strict conflict with the brief. And what not to learn, what most people learn from these experiences is, why didn't they allow in the brief for solutions that were actually interfering with the perimeter of the dry dock, right? People say, why would you limit the creativity in the first place? You might have had more spectacular architecture had all the 6 contestants in this competition been allowed to speculate on building the museum into the surrounding of the dry dock. That's a wrong learning to do, because at that time when we were actually designing the competition, the budget was 130 million Danish crowns. There was no way you could allow the perimeter to be compromised in that design. So you could not learn that you should give allowance for creative violation by reinterpreting, redesigning the brief. So that's my story about architectural competitions. There is a limit to our understanding of how the design of a competition translate into the performance of competition, as I said. We are misinformed if we think that we can design and influence and manage the process of creativity in the architectural competition by the design of the competition as an event. There are many ways in which we have to accept that these creative processes will have a solution and outcome which is more based on judgment than on decision making. It's not a rational, calculated decision of who is the winner. It's a judgment of how these various proposals can be ranked and then rated. So the winner and the rules of the game are actually determined in the same process. It's not first the rules that are designed and then we calculate the winner. It's all in the same process. It's a judgment.
Now it works. Kristian, thank you very much for your talk, for your reflection on design competitions overall, and I think the key message you summarized it in your last sentence. It's a very, very specific procedure, the design competitions, who does different things in one procedure. So it's not a sequence of, how we usually think about it. Like first we need to know precisely what we want, and then we define some KPIs or so to measure which project fits the goals the best. But it's a kind of a learning procedure so that it actually fits into your description of what is judgment. If that is the case, I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, when we understand competitions as joint learning procedures, and with joint I mean also the jury and the organizer, then the job of every competition is to reflect also critically about the rules of the game, which is the program brief. You brought here as an example a very extreme case, I guess, and you have good reasons to bring such an extreme case, because here you can really show where the worlds seem to collide, right? But to a certain extent, this is precisely the quality of the competition. So kind of the catastrophe here and the quality, they are maybe in the same dimension. Is it a question of to what extent that goes? And is there a limit where you can say, okay, here the competition is working very well. It's a good example of what a competition can do. Or is it, as it might be the case here, a story of where the competition as a format breaks down because it goes too far? So is there something in between where you would say you should try to keep the competition in this sphere of learning without hampering the brief too much? Or how do you think about that, having looked into so many procedures?
Thank you for that question, which is, of course, very, very relevant. What I would like to say is that this is an extreme case which was sort of leading to a formal conflict for reasons that have nothing to do with the competition as an institution. I have to explain a little bit, but there was one of the to avoid this conflict, it was obvious that this was illegal in a sense, and therefore the first attempt by the organizers and the client was to delegitimize the certain outcome. And therefore they claimed that all proposals were not buildable within the budget. And they came forward with a suggestion that, and if it's not in compliance with the brief and the budget request, they are not entitled to be paid for their participation. So the client offered that if they accepted that there would be no possibilities for protesting against the outcome of the competition, they would neglect the fact that they were not in compliance with the budget, and therefore they would get paid for their participation. Nobody knew about the conflict, and it is a sealed bid, so it was only the client and the jury that knew about this complexity. And one of the contestants said, I think my proposal could be built within the stated budget. I'm not going to accept this. All the others accepted this, and had this final also said, okay, I take the pay and accept that I don't have any possibility for protesting in the outcome. This would have been a confirmation of the fairness of the architectural competition, right? So it was completely circumstantial aspects of the competition that made it transparent, that made the conflict public and therefore visible to everybody. I think most of the time people accept, as I said, their faith in the competition. They do not protest. They accept the feasibility of arguing that the winning proposal actually made sense in view of the brief. There also made sense, but the other made more sense or whatever, right? So it's an indication that it's not this process is not extreme in other ways than it became a public, formal conflict.
Maybe do we have to go into another dimension in the discussion, which would be a cultural or even a socio-psychological perspective, because when we talk about architectural competitions, we also talk about architects.
Yeah.
And they tend to see themselves as a heroic figure and rather be a tragic hero than no hero. Right?
Yeah.
And I actually mean what I'm saying. It's a very special, specific, and distinguished self-image that architects have, and they cultivate that very much. And so, in a way, the competition is not just, a means to find for the client to find a project or find a partner. This can also go into public markets and stuff like that. But is it not also a ritual? A ritual that, as a ritual, it must be a black box. A ritual is not a ritual if it's totally transparent. And so it is actually asked for creating the Deus ex machina, which is the good, We are looking for what is the right answer for a question for the client, sometimes knowing or thinking about in which direction it would go. In other cases, maybe not, creating the very surprising outcome maybe. But the core of the competition culturally with regard to architecture, urbanism as a specific field, what can you say about that?
The culture that I've studied with among architects, I think is very interesting because I praise them occasionally by saying they are good losers. And they come back to me and say, we have learned to lose. Because in architectural competitions, what is the chance of winning? With 1 out of 6 or 8 and the rules being retrospectively determined, it's very hard to predict when you win and when you lose, right? So they are busily working on their next project when they got the final result from these competitions. And the culture is never look back, in a sense, never learn. We are busy trying the next time. There is one culture that says that part of the culture understanding is that if you put more effort into the design, you have a bigger chance of winning. I've studied a Norwegian architectural practice where they put all their effort into one competition per year, and they had a fairly high chance of frequency of winning. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist, of course. But most of the other think that it actually pays to invest more in the competition. That's a false notion, right? Because the logic is, if you get 300,000 kroner to participate, they all claim that they put in 3 times as much of their own money in participating in the competition. And therefore they ask for more remuneration. I said, but if you always put 3 times as much as you get paid in a competition, you will end up investing even more money of your own in the competition. But there is this trust that if you read the brief more carefully, provide more tangible deliverables in the competition, you will have a higher chance of winning. That's a strong cultural assumption. We can show that it has nothing to do with the chance of winning the competition. Whether they are selected as winner or not has nothing to do with the coherence and the consistency of the design. There is this very interesting difference between the winning proposal and the losing proposal. All the losing proposals are final proposals. The winning proposal can be criticized on certain points for inconsistency or even violation of the brief, and it can be granted the right to the opportunity to correct this incorrectness in the subsequent detailing of the project. So the winning proposal can be criticized on many accounts, but will be granted the right to improve themselves, while all the others are final. So we have seen winning proposals that were lousy but inspirational in a sense, sort of from a technical point of view, lousy, but from the ways in which they inspired the jury, they were selected without a high investment in the interest. So there are lots of cultural understanding in the architectural competition that will actually prolong this institution, but will also hide the ways in which these competitions are actually performed.
That is so interesting. I mean, knowing at least a part of the body of empirical work that you have been doing, I know that you're not talking in an anecdotal way about that stuff, but that you have looked into many procedures and many really different procedures. And an experience that both of us are sharing is that the clients or the organizers of competitions, and sometimes even the participants, are very puzzled and sometimes even shocked when you just describe accurately what happened and how does it really work. Our colleague Jan Silberberger, which we talked about in his PhD, he worked in an ethnographic way, and for instance, he just noticed that the plants that were hanging high were being studied, and the plants that were hanging here were not being studied because it's usually old men in the jury. And they don't go down on their knees. And sometimes this is really relevant, and I mean this adds up to the whole way in which competitions are really run. And so maybe this is something for the lunch break. We have to go deeper in this discussion, but it's very interesting that those people who spend most time and most money with design competitions usually don't understand the performance of that procedure. That's very interesting. I want to briefly open the floor for a couple of questions, and then our group, I think we can continue the discussion over lunch.
Thank you very much. It was so inspiring. As a sociologist, I'm more one of your people, right? So you just answered my questions, which is frustrating. Like this, is there empirical work, like statistics, that would prove what you just showed us?
Not statistical proof I have, but I have a lot of observations. I cannot claim to do statistical proof because I don't trust the formal documentation from these procedures. Whatever I would need in order to do a thorough study across the board would be to rely on the jury's reports from the competitions. And since I have seen that they are justifications, they are rationalizations of a process that has a completely different notion, it would be a mistake to do calculations on that. So I rely on this simple fact that if I can prove that it's possible, then I don't have to show that it's likely or anything else. It's the fact that it's possible to win an architectural competition with something which is blatantly in conflict with the brief. That's the idea. That could happen again. It's not necessary to claim that it's likely that it will happen again, but I say it's possible that it will happen again. And if it's possible that it could happen again, what implications would I, for myself, draw if I were a participant in an architectural competition? Would I take the brief as literally as possible, or would I try to apply some other notion of reading and interpreting the needs? It's very striking to see that clients are supposed to know what they want, and that is translated into the brief of the competition. And then to realize in the midst of this process that they didn't mean it literally either, that they were looking for things to say that were reporting on the identity of the organization. And the brief is also a way of communicating to the architects and to the general public what kind of client, what kind of organization am I? So there are so many other aspects of preparing a brief that has nothing to do with the fact what they need functionally. In one competition that I studied from my own university, we produced ourselves as an educational institution which were interested in slow learning and group processes of teaching. And that was the message we sent to the architects, that we were interested in slow learning and group-based teaching. While the fact, of course, was that what we needed were huge auditoriums, because each group was at least 120 people, huge programs. So if you read that brief as an indication of what kind of needs do we have, you would design small group rooms, but you would not be in anything close to the needs of the organization. So how do we interpret whether to take the requests in the brief from the client literary or not literary? The fact is that we only know after the fact, as after we have appointed the winner, which aspects of the self-description in the brief we should have taken literary. It was not known in advance, and it was not trustful. So, yeah, I could do calculations on reports from the jury on the brief and stuff like that, but somehow they wouldn't capture the quality of these processes, because it's all in the process that we determine what is important and what is the process. It's you probably know Albert Hirschman as a sociologist, but his claim is that it's all about possibilism. We have to show, as a result of our research, what is possible and what is not possible. It's more important to show the variety than calculate the likelihood of certain things happening. We know you can win with a proposal that is strictly in conflict with the brief, but we don't know when it will happen again, and if it will happen next time. We only know that it's still a possibility that it might happen the next time or the next time over. We cannot predict it, but we know that it's possible.
So I think you are coming back again to the core of what is judgment. You know, it's a very specific form of decision making. I think that's the core. Just very briefly, there is a couple of pieces of research who really looked at the process of decision making and what their relation is to the jury report. And that is very interesting. You briefly pointed at it. Jury reports are highly political documents. They hardly ever tell you what happened in the jury systematically, right? And so that adds to what you have been explaining in detail. But I think this is also very important when we keep on working with the format of a competition, which I still find very intriguing, very interesting, very open also for creativity, but very complex at the inside. And so the question really is, what can we learn, about strategies? We have now talked about the strategies for the participants, but I mean, somebody has to pay for all of that. And in Switzerland, we have globally, speaking globally, we have the highest density of architecture competitions in the universe as far as we know it. And there is so little reflection on how to work with this procedure. And it puzzles me. I have been thinking about these formats since I think it was 2007 that I started with it, and I still can't get my head around it because it's so much money, so much effort, so much risks also that you put into competitions. There are offices that start and say in the first 5 years we never won a competition. And then we learned how to work with it, and since then we're always winning. So there are strategies of learning empirically, Yeah. But when you ask, what precisely did you do different, or so, it's very hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's very hard to tell. I think there were a couple of questions here. Okay, 3 brief questions, and then we shift to talking and eating at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very much interested really in the work of the jury as a social process. And my question would be, did you do really this research, not what comes out in the official report? Because, doing ethnographic work there, you will change the process by being there and asking, so this is not, this does not stick to the brief, but it's an interesting idea. So how really to research that, what happens in a jury? How did you do that?
I was there. In some cases, I was actually officially a part of the process, appointed by the client. But most of the time, I was just observing. And there is going on so many things that my presence was not conspicuous at all, and I didn't interfere with the process at all. But I can tell you that it's that at one occasion where I was present and observing the chief of procurement from the client was sitting in. He was not participating in the process, but he was sitting in. At some point, he interrupted the procedure by saying, "You are not allowed to make comparisons between the different entries. Formally, you have to rate and evaluate each proposal on its own terms, and only when you have rated it, you are allowed to rank it." And as you all know by now, that's not how juries work. They start by the ranking, and then the rating follows from that. But most of the learning and most of the procedures and most of the architectural designs, architectural competition designs are built on the premise that we should improve the quality of the rating in order to make the ranking easier. It's a total misunderstanding that this chief of procurement because people were making faces, and fortunately he left the room soon after, so they could continue with their procedures. But this completely alien notion that you must not rank or compare, you should rate on individual terms. It's so telling, right? But it strikes me as a very important proof that ranking comes before rating in these processes, and it's not the other way around. And when we try to learn from experience, we would design a competition that made rating better in order to make ranking less problematic.
I think that would be another lecture, because that is the very tenuous relation between public procurement procedures and competitions.
Yeah.
They don't match.
No.
But in the building industry, competitions are used as procurement methods, and this is inherently a huge conflict.
Yeah.
But the whole scene has managed to keep that under the table,
Yeah.
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But still, so we had two other brief questions and brief answers.
Did you also do research about more open formats of competitions, like Studienwettbewerbe that are more in dialogue with the client?
I wrote a whole book on dialogue-based competition, which was wonderful. It's in Danish, so don't worry. But I've been very much interested in seeing how the interaction along the competition procedure actually took place, and how it confirmed the idea that things are tentatively evaluated along the way. So most of the things in a dialogue-based competition will be complex in terms of roles and rules and stuff like that. Some of the jury members participated in designing the proposals in this, which is somewhat problematic, but it didn't show in final entries, of course. But one of the most important things that I saw along this dialogue was that it was a very long and very intensive competition between 3 architects. And one of the architects had put, and I won't tell you the story, but the problem was that this one architect had at first put the library on the top of the building, and the 2 other proposals had put the library near the entrance in the ground floor. And the jury and the feedback they received over and over again was that it was wrong to put the library in the top floor. They should be in the bottom floor. And those who had put it in the bottom floor was praised by the fact that they had put it near to the entrance. And that went on for quite some time. This architect was quite stubborn putting the library in the top, and was scolded seriously. And then in the final entry he made, as this was a continuous process, and then at some point in time, for 2 weeks, they prepared their final entry. And he put the library next to the entrance, and he won. And those who had been praised for putting it in the ground floor and had found no reason to change that design decision, they were criticized for not finding the optimal location for the library. Can you see how things that at some point in the process are things that are speaking favorably for a design suddenly become the source of criticism and justifying why they couldn't win the...
So it's hard to learn.
It's hard to learn.
I'm reminded a lot about the lecture before on the CBS, and how this successful transformation that also an architectural competition is not always easy to explain, or maybe does not need to be explained in order to repeat it. And when we come back to the Dome of Florence, where 2 sentences were enough, would you say, like, right now, where the briefs get more and more complicated or extensive, is that due to a lack of maybe courage to lose control over the result, or is it a lack of trust in the ability of the architecture or the architect's work that actually makes this more complicated these days?
I think I was referring to the altar of progress in the church of control, and I think this increase in the extension of the brief is actually an attempt to show that we are in better control of the subsequent growth, because we have to justify upfront that it's worthwhile to do an architectural competition. Everybody says that it's so difficult to make architectural competition. How can we control that it's worthwhile to do it, and how can we control that we attract the best architects, and how can we control that they will actually put serious effort into the design proposals and stuff like that. So I think it's all sort of understandable. It's symbolism. The substance, you know the distinction between symbolism and substance, right? And that there is an important message for management also in finding a trade-off between the symbolism and the substance of things. The symbolism is clear. We want fairness, we want control, we want to find a rational argument for actually conducting this competition. The substance of it is related to the fact that we should not take it seriously, right? Symbolism should be taken seriously, but not literary, right? So we say things that may be partly true, but not completely true, right? We suggest ideas that we want to be explored, but not to be part of the solution, right? So part of this is, yes, we want people to experiment with the interpretations. We are forced to present a picture that somehow we can pre-imagine the outcome of the competition. We do that and control the procedure. We do that by prescribing more and more about the procedure. But
I think with this creative tension, we have to leave it here for now, at least. Thank you for coming. We have very young guests there in the back, even future colleagues, I think. And we have alumni that visited this program in previous generations. So thank you very much. But above all, thank you, Kristian, for inspiring us with your reflection. And we invite you now for lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.